Welcome back for another deep dive.
Always exciting to be here.
Today, we're diving into something you interact with every day, maybe without even realizing it.
Let me guess.
Algorithms.
Makes sense.
And specifically, how these lines of code are making decisions for us in ways both big and small. We've got a ton of research here, exploring everything from the potential benefits to the risks of letting algorithms call the shots, especially when we don't always understand how they work.
You're right. It's fascinating how embedded algorithms are in our lives now. Goes way beyond personalized recommendations on Netflix or Spotify. Think about navigating traffic with Google Maps or getting loan approvals, even medical diagnoses. Algorithms are often working behind the scenes.
Exactly, and that's what's so interesting. We're handing over some of our decision-making power to these complex systems. So
Right.
the big question is, how do we ensure these digital helpers are truly working for us, not against us, especially when they're crunching through mountains of data we could never process on our own?
Great question. That's where the concept of algorithmic decision-making comes in, or ADM for short.
Okay, ADM.
These systems, whether simple or super complex, use data to predict your preferences and potentially make better decisions. At least that's the idea.
The better being the key word there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for a little help navigating choice overload, but how do we know these algorithms are actually aligned with what we want, not just what some programmer thinks we want?
Right, and that's where understanding the different levels of human involvement becomes crucial. Sometimes you're in the loop, meaning the algorithm suggests, but you make the final decision.
Okay, so I have the final say.
Other times you're on the loop. The algorithm decides, but you can override it.
I see.
And then there's out of the loop, where the algorithm's in total control. Think self-driving cars.
Okay, so different levels of control.
Yeah.
But even when we're in the loop, how much are we being nudged in certain directions without even realizing it? Like, is that algorithm suggesting this particular movie because it's actually good for me? Or because it benefits the streaming platform somehow?
That's a valid concern. And it gets even more complex when we're talking about algorithms powered by machine learning, where even the developers can't always fully explain why the system made a particular choice.
So it's like having this incredibly powerful tool, but maybe not fully understanding the instructions, or even who wrote them in the first place. No wonder people are feeling a bit wary.
It's definitely a balancing act. On the one hand, we have the potential for these systems to truly enhance our capabilities. Think back to what we were saying about choice overload. Algorithms can help us sift through endless options and make decisions more efficiently.
Okay, so how does that actually play out in our everyday lives? Give me a real-world example.
Well, imagine you're trying to decide what to watch on Netflix. You could spend hours scrolling through endless titles. Or you could let the algorithm suggest something based on your viewing history. And maybe, just maybe, it introduces you to a genre you never would have considered otherwise, expanding your horizons.
That's a great example. It's like having a friend who knows your taste, but also pushes you a little outside your comfort zone. So in that sense, algorithms can actually help us be more open to new experiences.
Precisely. And it goes beyond just entertainment. Think about managing your finances. An algorithm could analyze your spending habits and suggest ways to save money, or even invest wisely, things you might not have the time or expertise to figure out on your own.
So it's not just about convenience, it's about empowering us to make smarter choices. Maybe even choices that align with our long-term goals, right? Like finally getting around to that learn a new language resolution we make every year.
Exactly. It's about helping us bridge the gap between our intentions and our actions, which, let's face it, is something we all struggle with sometimes.
But here's where I get a little nervous. How do we know these algorithms are actually working in our best interest? And not just serving someone else's agenda? How do we build trust when we're essentially dealing with a black box?
That is the million-dollar question. And to understand the nuances of that trust dilemma, we need to delve into a concept called principal-agent theory.
Okay, principal-agent theory.
It's an economic framework that helps explain why trust can be so tricky when one person relies on another to act on their behalf.
Okay, break that down for me. What does this economic theory have to do with me and my algorithm-powered movie recommendations?
Think of it this way. You're the principal in this scenario, and the algorithm is the agent you've hired to help you make decisions. You rely on its expertise, but you also face information asymmetry, meaning the algorithm knows way more about its data and processes than you do.
So it's like taking your car to a mechanic. You trust they know what they're doing, but you don't necessarily have the same level of expertise to check their work.
Exactly. And just like with a mechanic, there's always the potential for the agent, in this case the algorithm, to act in a way that benefits them more than you. They could be suggesting repairs you don't actually need. Or, in the case of an algorithm, maybe recommending products that generate more revenue for the company, not necessarily the best products for you.
That makes me think twice about those targeted ads that seem to follow me everywhere online. It's like they know exactly what I'm thinking. So how do we guard against that kind of manipulation? How do we make sure the algorithms we're relying on are truly trustworthy?
That's where things get even trickier because, with algorithms, we're often dealing with a unique challenge called type 3 opacity. It means that even the experts who design the algorithm might not fully understand how it's reaching certain conclusions.
Wait, so it's like taking your car to a mechanic who speaks a language you don't understand. That's not exactly reassuring.
Not exactly, and that's why building trust in these systems is so crucial. It's not enough to just rely on the algorithm's output. We need ways to evaluate its trustworthiness, to
Yeah.
peek behind the curtain and understand how it's making decisions, and to ensure those decisions align with our values.
So how do we do that? If even the experts don't always have all the answers, how can we, as everyday users, navigate this complex landscape of algorithmic decision-making?
Well, one approach that's gaining some traction is explainable AI.
Explainable AI.
It's essentially trying to make these complex algorithms more transparent.
Okay.
So we're not just taking their decisions on faith.
Explainable AI, that sounds promising.
Yeah.
So are we talking about some kind of algorithmic translator that breaks down these complex decisions into plain English?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as just hitting a translate button.
Right.
There are a few different approaches.
No, okay, so let's unpack that.
Sure.
What are some of the ways researchers are trying to make these black boxes a little less opaque?
One approach is to design simply models from the get-go,
Okay.
ones that are easier for humans to interpret.
So simpler to understand.
Yeah, but the trade-off is that these simpler models might not be as powerful or accurate as their more complex counterparts. It's a bit like choosing between a detailed map with every back road
I see.
and a simplified one that only shows the major highways.
I can see how that would be a tough choice.
Yeah.
So what are some other options if we want to keep the power of complex algorithms, but still understand how they're working?
There's something called mechanistic interpretability.
Mechanistic interpretability.
Just basically trying to reverse engineer these complex algorithms
Okay.
to figure out the step-by-step logic behind their decisions.
So kind of like taking apart a clock to see how all the gears and springs work together.
Yeah.
But I imagine with algorithms, it's a lot more complicated than that.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And it can be incredibly time-consuming,
Right.
especially with the most sophisticated algorithms that are constantly learning and evolving.
Right, so not exactly a quick fix for everyday users
Right.
who just want to understand why their news feed looks the way it does, or why they keep getting recommended that same brand of sneakers.
Exactly.
Right.
There's also the approach of post hoc explanation,
Post hoc explanation.
where you try to provide some sort of summary or rationale for why the algorithm reached a specific conclusion.
I see.
But these explanations are often incomplete and can be costly to produce.
So it's kind of like getting a simplified summary of a dense scientific paper.
Yeah.
You might get the gist,
Right.
but it's not the whole story.
Right.
And if even explainable AI has its limitations,
Yeah.
what other options do we have for building trust in these systems?
Well, instead of focusing solely on making the algorithms themselves more transparent,
Okay.
we can shift our attention to what's called institution-based trust.
Institution-based trust. That sounds a lot less technical.
Yeah.
Break that down for me.
It means looking at the broader social, political, and economic environment that shapes our trust in these systems. Think about it. You're more likely to trust a mechanic if they have a good reputation in the community, right?
Right.
Or if there are consumer protection laws in place that hold them accountable.
Right. It's like having a safety net.
Exactly.
You're not just relying on blind faith. There are external factors
Right.
that increase your confidence.
Right.
So how do we apply that logic to the world of algorithms?
We need to create institutions that help us evaluate and choose between different algorithmic options.
Okay.
Institutions that provide a level of oversight and accountability.
So instead of trying to understand the inner workings of each algorithm,
Right.
we need ways to assess their trustworthiness from the outside.
Exactly.
Okay.
And one way to do that is through something called information intermediaries.
Information intermediaries. But
Think of them like consumer reports,
okay.
but for algorithms.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to decode the algorithm myself,
Right.
I could turn to a trusted source that's already done the legwork.
Exactly.
What would these algorithmic watchdogs actually do?
They could provide independent evaluations of different algorithms,
What?
helping us understand which ones are most likely to align with our preferences and values.
Okay, so they're analyzing things like transparency, fairness,
Yeah.
accuracy,
Yeah,
essentially giving us a scorecard for different algorithmic options.
precisely. And they could do this in a way that's easy for the average person to understand
Right.
without needing a degree in computer science.
That's key, because right now it feels like you need to be a programmer just to understand the basics of how these systems work.
Right. It's about empowering users to make informed choices,
Right.
just like we do in other areas of life.
Like choosing a political candidate, for
Sure.
example.
Right.
Most of us don't have the time or expertise to deeply analyze every policy position. So we rely on shortcuts like party affiliations, endorsements from trusted sources, or just our past experiences.
Exactly. And we can apply that same logic to algorithms.
We need to create an ecosystem where we have multiple algorithmic options to choose from,
Mm.
and then we have these information intermediaries helping us make informed choices about which ones to trust.
Okay, so how do we get to this algorithmic utopia where we have both choice and trust? It sounds like we need a pretty big shift in how these systems are developed and regulated.
It definitely requires a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
We need government policies that support this ecosystem.
Okay.
Things like information disclosure requirements for companies using algorithms,
Okay.
guaranteeing access for third-party auditors, and setting clear performance metrics so we can compare different algorithms side by side.
So create the right rules of the game to encourage transparency and accountability.
Exactly.
But it can't just be about government regulation, right?
Right.
What can we do as individuals
Right.
to be more informed consumers of algorithms?
There's a lot you can do.
Okay, like what?
Start by researching alternative platforms and services.
Okay.
Don't just go with the default option.
Right. See what else is out there.
Yeah.
You might be surprised to find services that prioritize transparency or give you more control over your data.
So if I'm feeling like my social media feed is a bit too predictable,
Yeah.
maybe I try out a new platform that uses a different algorithm for recommendations.
Exactly.
Branch out a bit, see what else is out there.
Exactly.
While you're at it,
Yeah.
take a closer look at your data privacy settings.
Good idea.
Those can give you some control over how your information is used to personalize those algorithmic decisions,
Exactly.
right? Because knowledge is power.
Yes.
The more you understand about how your data is being used,
Right.
the better equipped you are to make informed choices about which platforms and services you trust.
Right.
What else?
Start following some of those algorithmic watchdogs we were talking about.
Okay.
There are researchers, journalists, and activists out there
Okay.
who are doing great work in demystifying these systems and holding companies accountable.
I love that idea. It's like having a personal guide to navigate this complex landscape.
It is.
So maybe instead of just passively scrolling through your social media feed,
Yeah.
you start asking questions like, why am I seeing this?
Yeah.
Who benefits from me clicking on this link?
Exactly.
The more we engage with these questions, the more
Mhm.
we push for greater transparency and accountability. So while trusting a black box might seem scary,
Yeah.
we're not powerless in this algorithmic age.
Right.
Building the right institutions and becoming more informed users can empower us to make choices about the algorithm shaping our lives.
Absolutely. Remember, these algorithms are tools.
Right.
And like any tool, they can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
The key is to make sure we're the ones in control,
Right.
not the other way around.
That's a great point. It's not about fearing technology.
Right.
It's about understanding it and shaping it to serve our needs.